everybody. This is a 4:30 p.m. update on what is now Tropical Storm Ophelia. Currently at 60-mile-per-hour winds, and it is moving around 12 miles per hour to the north-northwest before making landfall tomorrow morning. And this could maybe strengthen a few more miles per hour because these waters are very warm before it reaches the coast. We'll take a look at the track here. You can see landfall just before 8 a.m. around the Crystal Coast, somewhere around Cape Lookout, all the way down to Surf City. You can see that cone is still a little bit wide. But regardless, we're going to be tracking tropical storm impacts all across eastern North Carolina. And then as we head throughout the weekend, it's pretty quick moving, so that is some good news as we head throughout the day on Saturday and especially Sunday. We're looking at improving impacts. We'll take a look at radar right now. Again, it's 4:30 p.m. We've just seen these tropical bands move in and push in. Right now, we're looking at heavier bands up just to the west of Pitt County, Martin, Bertie County. Heavier rain there north between Windsor and Plymouth. And if we take a look down to the Crystal Coast, now you're starting to see some heavier bands move along the Crystal Coast as well. And still lots of storm activity offshore with the center of the storm as well. But all across East North Carolina, pockets of heavier rain will be expected through much of the overnight here, even into early tomorrow morning. So best to just stay inside because the more rain we get, the more potential of flash flooding that we'll see. And we'll take a look at winds right now. We've been seeing tropical storm force winds, especially along the coast, since early this afternoon, late this morning. And notice the stronger winds just start to creep closer to eastern North Carolina as we head throughout the night as the storm pushes closer to eastern North Carolina. So because of the orientation of the winds and the persistence, we do have storm surge watches and warnings. All the way down the Neuse and Pamlico rivers where the Tar River meets is where those warnings are. Tropical or storm surge warnings along Highway 12. And then notice along the Crystal Coast all the way down to our Onslow County beaches, there is still a storm surge watch. But you can see where we do expect some of the higher storm surge totals along the Neuse, adjacent rivers and creeks, 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. So if you're trying to compare this to Idalia, it's not necessarily the same. We see a little bit more storm surge than what we did with Idalia, if you remember a few weeks ago. Crystal Coast, we're heading down towards River Bend, all the way along the Neuse rivers. Same story, you know the spots. If you live near one of those flood-prone zones, hopefully you already kind of protected your property or got away if you need to. And at the Pamlico River, where the Tar River meets, that's where we can see over 6 feet of storm surge because of that more easterly component that we'll see throughout the overnight hours. So Washington, up to Grindsland there, really kind of watch out for some of your low-lying areas where water will start to pond over, especially as we head into the high tide times. We'll get to that in a second here. And Pamlico Sound counties, not as high as storm surge, 1 to 3 feet expected, even along the Crystal Coast. And it's more so on the day of Saturday that the sound side of the Outer Banks and the western beaches will be affected by the storm surge as the winds turn more from the west. So we'll take a look at high tides here. You see we had high tide this afternoon at 1:09 p.m. We are heading into low tide, but of course with the winds, we are still seeing elevated water levels. Low tide is at 7:53 p.m., so after that, the high tide will be coming in, and that's when you expect to see possibly the peak of the worst of the storm surge in the overnight hours. Our next high tide is at 1:21 a.m., so good news, most of us will be sleeping, hopefully. But that's when we expect possibly to get those 5, maybe 6 feet storm surge, that inundation in the overnight hours. And then even again on Saturday afternoon, could still see some issues with that high tide. Plus, with the rain that we've been talking about, we do have that flood watch that we are in effect until Saturday evening. As you know, many of our rivers have a delayed response, especially the Tar River, the Cape Fear River. With lots of rainfall expected, that will be an issue through Saturday evening of some of the backing up of the rivers and creeks. Higher rainfall totals closer to the coast, 4 to 6 inches possible. Generally 2 to 4 inches inland. We've already picked up at least an inch for most of us. So it's the repeated rounds of rain that we'll really have to keep an eye on that will give us that flash flooding potential. So hopefully you are trying to work your way inside. It's a great night to stay inside and just take it easy. Again, here's those persistent northeasterly to easterly winds. Here is future track showing the heavier rainfall continuing into this evening. And then notice as the low becomes closer to eastern North Carolina, the coast, as it makes landfall somewhere from Cape Lookout down to Surf City, we'll kind of get a break with some of the rain. Maybe a little bit of some dry slot trying to get in there in the overnight hours, but still that wind pushing all that water up the Pamlico, up the Neuse, So that is when the storm surge really starts to kick in. So something we'll be keeping an eye on. Here's 8 a.m. You can see our model. This is just one model. Has the center of it moving up that 70 corridor and then north pretty quickly. So let's say 6, 7 a.m. is the expected landfall around the Crystal Coast. So when still you'll see those stronger winds. Heavy rain, though, can be expected through tomorrow morning. Here's lunchtime on Saturday. This center of tropical storm Ophelia will be moving north. So then we'll be on the improving side of things. And you can see winds start to turn westerly. That's when we'll have to start to worry about some of the sound side inundation. But good news is, as we get throughout the weekend, we'll be on the improving side of things. So just a quick recap, we are under high impacts, high risk of impacts in terms of the storm surge primarily. A high risk of winds, of course, and hopefully you secure your unsecured objects. Tornadoes is something we have to keep an eye out as well. And then the flooding risk due to the flash flooding and the storm surge inundation. Tornadoes, one last thing I'll mention. Along the coast, especially along the Outer Banks, down to the Crystal Coast, we're going to have to keep an eye out, especially in the overnight hours. Have a way to stay weather aware in case some of those water spouts move on the land, or maybe a quick spin-up tornado. So I'm meteorologist Grant Carlton. We'll have more updates, of course, throughout the afternoon. Check us out on air on WCTI News Channel 12 this evening at 5 and 6 p.m.